Welcome back to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. Here's your host, Brother Robert Johnson.
This is episode 358. Thanks for tuning in. This week on the program, I just want to once more mention that Camp Masonry was, in fact, I was correct in my assumption that it was going to be an amazing time, because it certainly was. I have to give a huge shout out to Brother Jason Shammy, Brother Nate, Brother Ken, and the slew of other brothers that were out there. Brother Dan Hrinko, Brother McClelland, so many guys that were just mind-blowing. Dave Bacon, holy cow. Dave gave an amazing presentation. I actually wrote a little bit about the experience. If you want to read about it, you can go to themidnightfreemasons.com and check out the article that I put up called Camp Masonry 2018, a recap. In it, I cover most of what we did, and it was just fantastic. What we're hoping to accomplish this week is to go ahead and finish the 3-part series that is from the Builder magazine on the Grand Orient of France. In addition, I have a new segment of the Masonic Minute with illustrious Brother Stephen L. Harrison. Huge thanks goes out to Brother Harrison for his continued efforts in enlightening us and edifying us with some great content. So we'll have that for you in just a little bit. Other pieces of the news this week, just need to go ahead and mention that I will be presenting at the Kansas Lodge of Research, doing a presentation on colonial masonry. If you've not seen that presentation, come on out. If you've seen that presentation, you should still come out, because there's going to be some great barbecue. You're going to want to go to the website for the Kansas Lodge of Research. I'll have the notes to that in the show notes, because they are asking for tickets in advance. The ticket, I think, is like $12 or $13, but I'm sure you're going to eat that ticket. Fantastic barbecue. Brother Alex Powers has put all that together for you, so definitely going to want to check that one out. Received a copy of The Northern Light in the mail, August 2018, volume number 49, number 3. You know, there was something really cool inside this issue. Our Sovereign Grand Commander Dave Glatley actually made a proclamation in here, and I'd like to just read that for you. It says, "Proclamation, Sovereign Grand Commander David A. Glatley, 33rd degree, proclaims November as Scottish Rite Month. To all brothers, let it be known and spread throughout the jurisdiction. Whereas the Scottish Rite Northern Masonic jurisdiction believes in the values of reverence for God, devotion to country, integrity, justice, service, and toleration, and whereas the Supreme Council promotes the aforementioned values through the written and performance exemplification of its degrees, and whereas the valleys of the Scottish Rite Northern Masonic jurisdiction seek to further inculcate the mission of the organization through its ritual and social programming, and whereas the members of the Scottish Rite Northern Masonic jurisdiction are committed to upholding these values in their daily lives. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, David A. Glatley, 33rd degree, Sovereign Grand Commander of the Scottish Rite Northern Masonic jurisdiction, do hereby proclaim the month of November 2018 as Scottish Rite Month in all our valleys throughout the jurisdiction. I encourage all valleys and brothers to plan and participate in events that demonstrate the strength and resolve we have for our organization and the values for which it stands, and further cement the relevance of Freemasonry as part of history as well as the future. In witness whereof I hereunto set my hand and cause the seal of the Scottish Rite Northern Masonic jurisdiction to be herein affixed. David A. Glatley, Sovereign Grand Commander." So you heard it here second. Pretty cool. I get to have my birthday month as Scottish Rite Month, so that's pretty awesome. I'm pretty sure Dave Glatley knew that it was my birthday that month, and he decided that's what it was going to be. Really cool. And if you want to read that magazine, then you're going to want to head on over to the Northern Lights website. Just go to the Northern Jurisdictions website, which is Scottish Rite NMJ. That's Northern Masonic Jurisdiction.org, and check it out. You'll also find the resources there to be on the Hout Great Academy. So pretty great stuff. Check it out. In the next coming weeks, I'm going to have an interview with, hopefully, the Southern California Research Lodge regarding one of the upcoming issues, which many people cannot wait to read, and likely going to get a new author on who released a new book just recently. And I'm working on a couple other really great episodes that are coming up, but we have to clear some legal stuff out of the way before we can just read that work on the air. I hope you are excited for the things to come, and let's get right into this week's paper. The Builder, March 1918. Internationalism and Freemasonry by Brother P.E. Kellett, Grand Master, Manitoba, Part 2. Let us now briefly consider the great point of cleavage between Anglo-Saxon Masonry and the Masonry of the Grand Orient of France. This cleavage is based largely on the suspicion, if not the definitive charge, that French Masonry is atheistic in its practices or it is in its tendencies. The Grand Orient of France was organized in Paris in 1736. Its constitution was of the model of Anderson's original constitution, 1723. The Grand Orient was recognized as legitimate Masonry by the Grand Lodge of England and, in fact, by all legitimate Masons throughout the world. At that time, in all Masonic constitutions, there was an absolute absence of dogma concerning in which all men agree. That is, to be good men and true, men of God and religion, and Masons were bound only to that religion in which all men agree. That is, to be good men and true, men of honor and honesty. The aim of the fraternity was purely humanitarian, its principles broad enough for men of every diverse opinion. The desire was simply to unite them, whatever their private religious beliefs, in uplift work for themselves and for humanity. Changes came first in England. About the middle of the 18th century, the so-called landmarks regarding a declaration of belief in the Grand Architect of the Universe and the placing of the Bible on the altar were adopted. Following this, for the greater part of a century, the French Constitution adhered strictly to the original plan of the fraternity and did not contain that formula which has since, in some places, come to be regarded as essential. During this time, neither the Grand Lodge of England nor any other recognized Grand Lodge took any exception to this notable omission. French Masons were considered neither godless nor atheistic. As time went on, the French Constitution was changed to conform to that of the Grand Lodge of England. One writer has said this was coincident with a closer political approach of the two nations, England and France. The Constitution of the Grand Orient of France followed the English copy until shortly after the Franco-Prussian War, when they reverted back to what it had been originally. Coincident with this change, history records political estrangement between France and England, which continued until recent years. When France reverted back to the original constitution, the Grand Lodge of England immediately afterwards severed relations with France, and generally speaking, Masonry of English-speaking countries followed suit, claiming that the change made by the Grand Orient of France was atheistic in tendency. Can French Masonry be said to be atheistical? Atheism is the doctrine that there is no God. It is no longer considered reasonable for anyone to dogmatically assert that there is no God, and it is a question if such a being as an atheist exists today. There is no unbelief. Whoever plants a seed beneath the sod and waits to see it push away the clod, he trusts in God. Whoever says when clouds are in the sky, "Be patient, heart, light breaketh by and by," trusts the Most High. Whoever sees, 'neath winter's fields of snow, the silent harvest of future glow, God's power must know. Whoever lies down on his couch to sleep, content to lock each sense in slumber deep, knows God will keep. Whoever says tomorrow the unknown, the future trusts the power alone, he dares disown. The heart that looks on when the eyelids close, and dares to live when life has only woes, God's comfort knows. There is no unbelief, and day by day and night unconsciously the heart lives by the faith that lips deny, God knoweth why. To be atheistic, French Masonry would need to have made the dogmatic assertion, "There is no God." This it has never done. It neither affirms nor denies anything relative to God. To suppose that French Masons deny the existence of God is to totally misunderstand them. They are as much averse to a dogmatic assertion of that kind as to one of the opposite kind. They are simply against a dogmatic assertion of any kind, as Masons, believing that Masonry is anti-dogmatic. Many, and possibly all, of their members would doubtless declare a belief in God at the proper time, but not as Masons in a Masonic lodge. The French Masons found their attitude on the first edition of the Constitution, which obliges Masons only to that religion in which all men agree, that is, to be good and true, or men of honor and honesty. Let us briefly examine what ground there is for their stand, and see whether or not we are justified in condemning it. For this purpose, I want to direct your attention to Anderson's Constitutions, 1723, concerning God and religion. A man is obliged by his tenure to obey the moral law, and if he rightly understands the art, he will never be a stupid atheist nor a irreligious libertine. But through in ancient times Masons were charged in every country to be of the religion of that country or nation, whether it was, yet it is now thought more expedient only to oblige them to that religion in which all men agree, leaving their peculiar opinions to themselves, that is, to be good men and true men of honor and honesty by whatever denominations or persuasions they may be distinguished, whereby Masonry becomes the center of union and that means of conciliating true friendship among persons that must have remained at a perpetual distance. Our own Constitution, concerning God and religion. A Mason is obliged by his tenure to obey the moral law, and if he rightly understands the art, he will never be a stupid atheist nor an irreligious libertine. He, of all men, should best understand that God seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but God looketh to the heart. A Mason is therefore particularly bound never to act against the dictates of his conscience, let a man's religion or mode of worship be what it may. He is not excluded from the order, provided he believe in the architect of heaven and earth and practice the sacred duties of morality. Masons unite with the virtuous of every persuasion in the firm and pleasing bond of fraternal love. They are taught to view the errors of mankind with compassion and to strive by the purity of their own conduct to demonstrate the superior excellence of faith that they may profess. Thus Masonry is the center of union between good men and true, and the happy means of conciliating friendship amongst those who must otherwise have remained at a perpetual distance. The Constitution of the Grand Orient of France. Freemasonry, an essentially philanthropical and progressive institution, has for its object the pursuit of truth, the study of morality, and the practice of solidarity. Its efforts are directed to the material and moral improvement of the intellectual and social advancement of humanity. It has for its principles mutual tolerance, respect for others and for oneself, and absolute liberty of conscience. Considering metaphysical conceptions as belonging exclusively to the individual judgment of its members, it refuses to accept any dogmatic affirmation. Its motto is liberty, equality, and fraternity. As to whether the Grand Orient of France has departed farther from the spirit and the letter of Anderson's original constitution than we have is not open to much controversy. The change they made in 1877 rather reverted back to it than went farther away from it. To show the real misunderstanding that has occurred with regard to their position, let me quote from the minutes of their general conventions when the change was made. We can then understand what the real meaning of their action was. At the French Masonic Convention of 1876, on the proposal of a lodge in the department of the Rhone, a committee was appointed to consider the question of suppressing the second paragraph of the first article of the Constitution concerning God and religion. The committee recommended that the proposition be postponed, and in recommending this, the reporter of the committee, Brother Maricault, made the following statement. Your commission has recognized that bad faith alone could interpret the suppression demanded as a denial of the existence of God and the immortality of the soul, human solidarity, and freedom of conscience, which would be henceforth the exclusive basis of Freemasonry, imply quite as strongly belief in a God and in immortal soul as they do materialism, positivism, or any other philosophic doctrine. Postpone met with opposition. Brother André Roussel, in advocating immediate action among the other statements, made the following statement. Quote, I am anxious to recognize with my brother, the reporter of the Commission, that Freemasonry is neither deistic, atheistic, or even positivist. Insofar as it is an institution affirming and practicing human solidarity, it is a stranger to every religious dogma and to every religious order. Its only principle is in an absolute respect for freedom of conscience. In matters of faith, it confirms nothing and it denies nothing. It respects in an equal degree all sincere convictions and beliefs. Thus, the doors of our temples open to admit Catholics as well as Protestants, to admit the atheist as well as the deist, provided they are conscientious and honorable. After the debate, in which we are at present taking part, no intelligent and honorable man will be able to seriously state that the Grand Orient of France has acted from a desire to banish from its lodges belief in God and in the immortality of the soul, but on the contrary, that in the name of absolute freedom of conscience, it proclaims solemnly its respect for the convictions, teachings, and beliefs of our ancestors. We refrain, moreover, as much from denying as from affirming any dogma, in order that we may remain faithful to our principles and practice of human solidarity." End quote. Brother Minot, in speaking on the same subject, said, quote, "The Constitution of 1865 had realized a transitory progress. The work must be completed and purified by suppressing dogma and by rendering Masonry once again universal by the proclamation of the principle of absolute freedom of conscience. Let no one be mistaken in this. It is not our aim to serve the interest of any philosophical conception in particular by our action in laying aside all distinction between doctrines. We have in view only one thing: freedom for each and respect for all." End quote. The recommendation of the committee prevailed, and action was postponed. In 1877, after a year's study by the lodges, the change was adopted by an almost unanimous vote. The reporter of the committee at the time said, quote, "Who is not aware at this moment that in advocating this suppression no one among us understands himself as making a profession of atheism and materialism. In regard to this matter, every misunderstanding must disappear from our minds, and if in any lodge there should remain any doubt in reference to this point, let them know that the Commission declares without reservation that by acceding to the wish of Lodge No. 9, it sets before it no other object than the proclamation of absolute liberty of conscience." End quote. When the proposition of the committee had been adopted by the General Assembly, the President proposed as an amendment the insertion of these words, quote, "Masonry excludes no one on account of his beliefs." End quote. Many regarded this as superfluous, but the President was insistent in order that it might be clearly established in the eyes of all that Masonry is neutral territory in which all beliefs are admitted and treated with equal respect. The suggestion was adopted. It may be interesting to note that the original proposal that the Grand Orient of France should suppress the formula of the Grand Architect of the Universe was a clergyman of the Protestant Church, and he stated in justification as follows, quote, "In suppressing the formula respecting to the Grand Architect of the Universe, we did not mean to replace it by a materialistic formula. None among us, in proposing this suppression, thought of professing atheism or materialism, and we declare formally and emphatically that we had no other end in view than to proclaim absolute liberty of conscience." End quote. I have given the words and opinions of those responsible for the change in the Constitution so that there may be no room for misunderstanding. The Grand Orient of France in making the change has done no more than was done by the government of Great Britain when she admitted members to the seats in the House of Commons by allowing them to make an affirmation only when their convictions would not allow them to take a religious oath. The same custom prevails in our courts of justice. Their position will bear a little further examination to make clear its consistency. The story, as depicted by our ritual, tells of a great loss and lifelong search for this something which was lost. Masonry ends at the point when something else is substituted to temporarily make good that loss, and at that point where Masonry ends, we are expected to begin the search. Various explanations have been given as to what this is that was lost, and which all Catholic and Protestant, Jew and Gentile, Christian and pagan are seeking for. The simplest and clearest explanation of this that was lost is that it was the quote-unquote way back to God. That is the door, then, to which Masonry leads. Cannot any of us go as far as that door with any, be he agnostic, deist, Buddhist, or any other, so long as he conforms to Anderson's original specifications and is a good man and true, a man of honor and honesty? At the door, of course, we would separate each to follow on his own way, but happily we can come back to the lodge again and again for mutual encouragement and for strength, for a fresh start on our several paths, all of which are alike, dark and obscure. It is not the function of Masonry to solve the riddle of life, but to propound it and stimulate and encourage each of her initiates to search for his own solution. It takes each man so far, and there leaves him to find the answer for himself. By the very fact that Masonry itself gives no answer, it demonstrates clearly that the answer is not the same to every man. All this would seem to lead to is freedom from dogma of all kind and justify France and Belgium in the stand they take. I do not wish to be understood to say that it is wrong for a Mason in a lodge to declare a belief in God, but I would like to be able to accept as brethren of any good men and true, men of honor and honesty who, in earnest, searches after the same truth as we are, even though they do not insist in lodge on a declaration of belief in God. French Masons appear to be worthy men, doing a wonderful work for the cause of progress and enlightenment. Another so-called grievance against the Grand Orient of France is that they have taken the Bible off the altar. Many of us have imagined that because the Bible is one of the great lights according to our ritual and usage, that its place has been in Masonic lodges from time immemorial. To most, the presence of the Bible on the altar is in some way a landmark. Suppressing it may be, but the Bible was not even mentioned in Masonic ritual until 1724, and it was in 1760 that Preston moved that it be made one of the great lights of Masonry. One might properly question whether Anglo-Saxon Masonry did not violate a landmark when she introduced religious dogmatism into Masonry in the middle of the 18th century. As Masons, we have before us the great object of the fraternal brotherhood of man. This will carry with it peace and prosperity. Is not the attainment of this worth the abolition of narrow intolerance? Let us maintain, if we wish, our own principles concerning God and religion, but forever banish all dogmatism as to what others shall do in this connection, so long as they are earnestly working to attain the great principles of Masonry. Does not the situation demand the serious thought of every Master Mason? Should not tolerance and fraternity prevail? France is holding out the brotherly hand to us, saying, "Let bygones be bygones, and let us look solely to the future." Should we as Masons hold at more than an arm's length an institution which consistently devotes itself to those lofty aims and pursuits which we preach better than we practice? Even as the arts, sciences, and other phases of human activity have benefited by the international discussion and concord, so also can Masonry benefit. If Masonry is to sustain in the future its splendid record and attain the object she seeks, is not worldwide international cooperation necessary? How else can we attain universal brotherhood? With the present world crisis, the time has come when Freemasonry should stand forth, free from all entrammeling influences in its grand simplicity. Our lodges should be centers of thought, influence, and effort, holding no task alien that will advance the cause of righteousness on earth. To this end, we could learn much by confraternity with such an organization as the Grand Orient of France. Is quote-unquote brotherly love to be nothing more than a label which we carry, but which does not properly belong to the goods at all? All right, we're going to take a quick little break there in the middle of the paper. The next section is called The Builder, 1918, Freemasonry in France, and this is by Brother George W. Baird, past Grand Master, District of Columbia. But before we get into that, let's check out this week's Masonic Minute.
On a recent high school tour, I saw a sign inside a classroom that read, "Thoughts become things." I like that idea. I had heard it before, but I wasn't sure where. I thought it might be a quote from an unknown person or something from a book or play. I decided to research it and maybe use it in an article. So I went where we always go these days to find out, straight to the internet. The first thing I ran into was this, from a metaphysics site. Thoughts become things when they are given substance with feelings in the mind. Bunk. It is true that thoughts can become things, but it takes a whole lot more than feelings in the mind to make a thought, some might call it an idea, become a reality. Good ideas are a dime a dozen. They really are. World peace. There's a good idea. Well, we've been rolling out visualize world peace bumper stickers for decades, and we're still visualizing, aren't we? Every master or grand master comes into his term filled with good ideas and the intention to make Freemasonry in general, or his lodge in particular, better by the time he leaves. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So, what are the secret ingredients that make things work? Think about that, because you and I both, I'll bet, have sat through many meetings in the fraternity and in business where great ideas are kicked around. Those meetings can produce a gold mine of things we can do. Those are the meetings we walk out of feeling energized. But if the ideas are not put into practice, nothing gets done. John Ruark of the Masonic Roundtable and Robert Johnson, host of this podcast, have written a book that, like those meetings, is bursting with ideas. You may have read the book. You may have told John and Robert it's the greatest thing you've ever read. But then, if you put it on the shelf and do nothing, they have wasted their time writing the book, and you have wasted your time reading it. You see, brothers, the secret ingredients that make things work, that make thoughts become things, are action, dedication, and hard work. If we take the ideas from that inspiring meeting and do nothing, or take their book, It's Business Time, and put it on the shelf, what have we accomplished? Let's challenge ourselves to take a single idea from that great meeting, or just one of the chapters from John and Robert's book, and put it into practice. That might not solve all our problems, but it would be a great start. Full disclosure, I'm doing this for Robert's podcast, but neither he nor John knew I was going to talk about their book. Steve Jobs, you may recall, had a lot of good ideas, and he knew how to turn those ideas into a lot of good things. I like his take about thoughts becoming things. Most people, he said, have a disease. They think once they've had a good idea, they've done 90% of the work. Coming up with the idea is easy. Working to make it a reality is the hard part. For the Whence Came You podcast, this is Steve Harrison with the Masonic Minute.
All right, a huge thanks goes out to illustrious Brother Harrison for that great Masonic Minute. I really like the message, regardless of whether or not he talked about the book. I had no idea, in fact, until I listened to it during editing. So, thanks again for mentioning the book, Brother Harrison. Everybody out there, if you are interested in getting the book, head on over to Amazon.com and type in It's Business Time and the word Freemasonry, and it'll be the number one result. When you click on there, you'll see three options. You can get it on Kindle, you can get it on Audible, or you can get it on paperback. If you'd like to get that book autographed, then go ahead and go over to wcypodcast.com and click on the link for the limited edition shop. Once you're there, you can scroll to the bottom and pick up a copy of the book there, and I'll autograph it. The primary difference, of course, is kind of a bummer, right? I'm not Amazon Prime, so I can't ship it to you for free. So it's the same price as it is on Amazon, but I have to charge $3.50 to ship it to you. And while you're there, go ahead and check out any number of the other ways to support the program, either by clicking on making a donation or becoming a contributor, producer, or a fellow of the show, and by shopping through some of our great friends. So we've got, of course, Levi Banker, who's got a great new shave soap out. You want to check that out. So wcypodcast.com, click on More, and then click on Banker's Best, or just go to buybankersbest.com, use the promo code BBWCY357 at checkout, and you'll get a percentage off. So it's really awesome. You can go to Onnit and click through our links, use the promo code WCY, and get 10% off there. And of course, one of our main producers, somebody who has been helping this show out for quite some time, is Brother Edgar Alejandro of Masonic Revival. Masonic Revival is the best place to go for contemporary Masonic designs. Newer stuff, not the same old tired stuff that we always see. I know I've told you guys before and I mention it all the time, but I really can't say enough good about Masonic Revival and what they're doing, not just for us here at the program, but for Masonry as a whole. There is a giant lack of quality Masonic items that are out in the web shops all over the place. When you go to Grand Lodge, there's the same people that are there selling some great things, to be sure, but nothing new, nothing exciting, nothing really quality made. I mean, it's quality, but it's not designed. It's not fresh. It's kind of old stuff you might find in your grandfather's closet, right? So we want to have some new stuff, something that speaks to us in this new generation of Masons that are coming up. So please go ahead and check out MasonicRevival.com. And with that, let's get into the second half of this paper and the last part of the series. The Builder, April 1918. Freemasonry in France by Brother George W. Baird, Past Grand Master, District of Columbia. There are 2 quote-unquote obediences in France and 3 in Germany. They are as separate and distinct as is the Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia and the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia. But it is not easy to make all of our people understand this. The Grand Orient, 1, is the older of the French bodies. The Grand Lodge of France separated from the Scottish Rite in 1804, but its lodges still meet in the same building with the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, and the personnel in the rites is almost identical. We have always been on terms of intimacy with the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite in France and in all South American countries, and with them the Scottish Rite is often mentioned as quote-unquote universal Masonry, though the writer knows of no friction between the Scottish Rite and symbolic Masonry in any part of the world. Symbolic lodges have separated from the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite in order to conform to the English and American system for the purpose of securing fraternal intercourse. Formerly and properly, a Mason who could prove himself was a welcome visitor in any lodge in any part of the world, unless the jurisdiction from whence he came had been interdicted, and any change from this plan is modern and is an innovation. The writer was made a Mason in a lodge in Portugal in 1867 in the French Rite and in the French language. The obligation was taken on a Holy Bible of the King James edition, the Bible which was translated out of the original tongues. This Bible is used by Protestants, Jews, and Mohammedans, and being from the original tongues, it is reasonable to believe it has less errors and less changes than the Dewey edition which is translated out of the Latin Vulgate. The personnel of the lodge that gave us light was made up of nominal Roman Catholics, about 70%, Jews, about 20%, and Protestants, about 10%. When asked what our religion was, we replied, the Constitution of the United States and the 10 Commandments, which seemed to satisfy the lodge. They were liberal, tolerant men. The lodge books recorded no living man's name, as in all other priest-ridden countries each man was required to take a sobriquet, or nom de guerre, as they say, for the reason that it was a penal offense to be a member of the Masonic fraternity in Portugal, and when the priests finally did discover the lodge and caused its destruction, there was not the name of a living man on any record. The members went to and from the lodge singly or in pairs, each lighting himself up the long flights of stairs with his wax taper, a rollino. It is not generally known that the Mohammedans believe in and read our Bible. One of the most bigoted sects of Islam is the followers of Jesus, and its sect is on the north coast of Africa. The Muslim believes more in the Quran than in the Bible. The Muslim believes more in the Quran than in the Bible, and it has the advantage of recommendation of containing no words which would shock the mind of a child. The Quran is in the Arabic, and there has never been a translation except an English edition, but neither Arabs nor Turks nor Egyptians ever read that edition. If they cannot read Arabic, they are dependent on others to read it for them. In English lodges, A Mohammedan is obligated on the Quran and a Christian on the Holy Bible. The purpose of the obligation is to bind the postulant, and for this reason he is obligated on what he believes to be most binding. This is recognized generally, but where we know only one book of sacred literature, we are too apt to believe there should be no other. We are taught that the Holy Bible is the divine revelation of the mind and will of God to man, but others differ with us in that. But if we can impose an obligation that will bind any and all, our principal purpose will have been accomplished. Freemasonry has been defined as a quote-unquote system of morals veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. It has never been claimed to be a religion, though the priests call it a sect. In the entered apprentice degree, we are taught that Masonry unites men of every country, sect, and opinion, and conciliates true friendship among those who might have remained at a perpetual distance. This, the French believe, is the acme of tolerance, and they take it literally. We claim no quote-unquote apostolic succession, nor do we administer extreme unction, give absolution, nor offer any assurance of admission to the Holy of Holies above, but we do strive to make better men of our members. We have no idea of the slings and arrows hurled constantly at the Masons in priest-ridden countries until we have been there. The long years of peace and harmony we have enjoyed have spoiled us and unfitted us for sympathy with our stricken brother abroad. Lodges in Italy and France have been raided. The lodge was interrupted by police at Voltaire's funeral. The writer was once detained at Mentone, on the border between Italy and Monaco, and witnessed the seizure of a Bible which an English-speaking woman was carrying into Italy. The guard, acting under orders, would not permit it to be carried into the country, but held the Bible for her until she should pass out of Italy. There have come to us from abroad many appeals for more intimate fraternalism. An invitation to an international Masonic Congress was sent to more than 200 Masonic powers about 1901, including the Grand Lodge, Grand Chapter, etc. of the District of Columbia, and the writer moved in Grand Lodge that a delegate be sent, but there was not even a second to the motion, so lightly did they regard it. Quote-unquote Masonic powers with European Masons means all Masonic organizations as Grand Lodges, Grand Chapters, Grand Commanderies, Consistories, etc., and these invitations went to all of the addresses the Swiss Masonic Bureau could obtain. It was stated it was a congress, not a conclave, so that the doors were not tiled, nor were the esoteric sections to be discussed as the writer understood it, and, as it turned out to be, the proceedings of that Congress were printed, and to my surprise, and maybe amusement, I found the following report of what took place at the banquet. Quote, Dr. Watts, Washington, W. President and Brethren, I have the honor of presenting to this distinguished body of Freemasons in Congress assembled greetings from the most worshipful Grand Master and Brethren of the Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia, United States of America. I have to say that the Grand Master is full of sympathy with the object of the Congress as outlined in several explanatory circulars received from Monsieur Paul-Émile Bonjour, the Grand Secretary. Permit me further to say that we are of the opinion that any movement in keeping with the sublime principles of the order, and that does not in the least degree conflict with the ancient landmarks, has our approval and fraternal cooperation. Thanking the projectors for their kind invitation to participate in the deliberations of this present Congress, I beg leave also personally to express my appreciation for the courteous attention I have received during the time I have been in the city. On behalf of my Grand Lodge, we wish the Congress success, and desire that beneficial results may follow its labor, which shall prove a blessing to all, especially the brethren. End quote. Had I not written very soon after this an essay on Prince Hall Masonry for the International Bulletin, the delegates who heard that very credible address would have supposed that the Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia had sent that Prince Hall delegate. The speech of Dr. Watts was in English, but the others were in French. The writer made a full report of the above, which was printed in the 1902 report of the Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia, and may be found on page 339. And now we come to the Grand Lodge of France. Why should we not at once accord it recognition? It may be asked what French Masons have done to merit this. Their Masonry was received from England, and the writer believes the French are now working more in accord with the first constitution of the Grand Lodge of England, Anderson's, than are many American lodges, which should be sufficient. Owing to the espionage of the Holy Fathers, the French history of Masonry has been greatly abridged and often suppressed. so that we have not the volumes to draw on that we would wish, but there are enough for this purpose. During the War for American Independence, called the Revolution, there existed in Paris a lodge, Les Neuf Soeurs, of which the American Commissioner Benjamin Franklin, John Paul Jones, the peerless naval captain Houdon, the unmatched sculptor Voltaire, the fearless, the great Helvetius, and many other eminent men were members. At that time there were atrocious oppressions of the people, not only by the rich and influential, but by the priests. In the Lodge Neuf Soeurs there was Élie Dumont, a young lawyer with a score of followers who took up the people's cause against oppression. For verification, we beg leave to invite reference to Les Mémoires Secrètes, Volume 11, and to Ed Tarchot, Volume 11, and Bechuet Précis Historique, Volume 2. One example is that of Jean Calas, a Huguenot who had been sentenced to punishment on the wheel by the tribunal of Toulouse, and he was thus executed. His offense was that he had assaulted his son who had been perverted to Romanism. His widow and his children were deposited of their property and belongings by confiscation, and they finally took refuge in Geneva and were sheltered by Voltaire. There was cause espoused by Voltaire, who advocated it by printed memorials, which he widely distributed. Élie Dumont defended the Calas family in the French courts without a fee or reward, and after 3 years of labor succeeded in having the judgment arrested and the widow's property returned to her. In the same tribunal, in 1746, a man and his wife, named Sirin, were condemned to death for an assault on their son who had been perverted to Romanism, and who had forbidden the son from continuing his acquaintance with the men who had proselytized him. The rest of the family took refuge in Geneva, and their case was appealed by Élie Dumont, who, after 5 years, succeeded in having the judgment reversed. So far as the confiscation went, and the family of Sirin was permitted to return to France and take possession of their property. We could multiply these examples indefinitely, if it were needed, but it is not. That Masonic Lodge became the target for Romish persecution and accusation. It was charged with atheism. Masonry was branded as a society of atheists in general, but Voltaire was the central figure of their atrocious attack. Dumont and his followers persisted in the defense of the inherent rights of the people and lighted a fire of indignation which kindled in the people a conscience of their inherent rights and was closely interwoven in the French Revolution which followed and which history has so vividly recorded. Voltaire was obliged to leave Paris to escape assassination. He took up his home in Ferney, near Geneva, in Switzerland, where he was held in high esteem. Napoleon I, who was a Mason, had held the Pope of Rome a prisoner, and this added to the anger of the priests who believed, and still believe, that the Pope is the father of princes, the ruler of the Christian world, and the vicar of Jesus Christ, and that there can be no proper government without his sanction. If a man goes on the street and cries, mad dog," he will jeopardize the life of every dog in sight, though there may be no mad dog at all. And if a mob, believing a priest carries the keys of heaven and hell in his girdle, hears his cries and accusations, they will give respectful and obedient attention to his utterances without further consideration. This is practically the condition which existed in Paris when the priests began to denounce Freemasonry in general, and Voltaire in particular. As they made Voltaire the central figure of attack, it may be proper to examine his case. Take the 24 volumes of Voltaire, which have been printed in English, and there cannot be found in them a word to justify the accusations that he was atheistic. He was without a doubt a deist. In the little town of Ferney, a chapel was built by Voltaire for his neighbors to worship in. A marble tablet over the door has engraved on it these words: Deo erexit Voltaire, MDCC LV 111. Which is 1758. When asked why he dedicated his chapel to God, he replied, "In London they erected their temple to St. Paul, in Paris to St. Genevieve, but I erect mine to God." When dying, he said, quote, "I die worshiping God, loving my friends, not hating my enemies, but despising superstition." Vide Appleton's New American Encyclopedia. His accusers were the priests, and the same frocked fraternity is still accusing Masonry. The Anti-Masonic Congress, which was convened at Trent in 1896, was attended by more than 200 bishops of the Romish Church, and many times that number of priests and zealous laymen. That Congress was called together with the concurrence in favor of Pope Leo XIII, who, in a special brief, bestowed his benediction and approval on its aims and purposes. 22 influential cardinals, over 200 bishops, bishops, the most important clerical associations, the whole of the clerical press sent their adhesions to this Tridentine council. Over 500 ecclesiastics from the highest to the lowest were present, and all European states, England, France, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Spain, Portugal, Italy, the United States of America, the South American republics were more or less numerously and influentially represented. Quote, general and particular aim, to wage war on Masonry as an institution, on Masons as individuals, in all countries and places where the order exists, to wage war on Masons, on Masonry as a body, by collecting supposed documents and facts, assertions of perjured Masons as evidence, and thus bring to light, or rather coin, by means of the press or special publications, all the misdeeds of the fatal institution, all the demoralizing influences it exercises through obscene and sacrilegious rites, corruption, and occult conspiracies on man and civilization, to wage war on individual Masons by opposing them in every phase of their existence, in their individual homes, in their industries, in their commerce, in their professional avocations, in all their endeavors to participate in public life, local or general, etc. End quote. A French reporter, Mr. Leo Taxel, had been employed to ferret out and report of the vagaries of Masonry, and in his report he gave them an account of a smithery in a cave under a rock of Gibraltar where iron tools were fashioned for use in devil worship. The speeches of the Holy Fathers on that occasion were drastic, atrocious, and anything but Christian-like. This Congress was as late as 1896 and must still be fresh in the memories of Masonic students. And from it we draw the lesson that the purpose of those people has not changed with time. So it is but fair to ask, shall we accept the testimony of these prejudiced, fanatical sorcerers against the French Freemasons? The Grand Orient of France, by giving countenance to a spurious body of Scottish Rite Masons in Louisiana in 1858, caused English-speaking Masons generally to suspend relations with that Orient, one after another, until such time as the Orient should revoke its sanction on the spurious body. Vide report of Grand Lodge of D.C. for 1870, page 6 and 7. It was not until the interdiction, but a tentative suspension of relations which the Orient was at liberty to automatically heal by the revocation of its sanction of that spurious, ancient, and accepted Scottish Rite body of New Orleans. That spurious body has long since gone out of existence, but the Grand Orient has never made any overture to the Grand Lodge of District of Columbia, nor any other American Grand Lodge, so far as the writer has been able to discover. But in 1878, the report of the Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia, page 20, says, quote, the action of the Grand Orient of France, expunging from its constitution the necessity for a firm belief in deity and the immortality of the soul, was called upon as unfinished business, and on motion it was ordered that the resolutions accompanying the report be considered separately. Resolved, that the action of the Grand Orient of France in ignoring the foundation principles of Masonry, that of a firm belief in God and in the immortality of the soul, meets with the unqualified disapproval of this Grand Lodge. End quote. This is the last entry we can find in our reports of the Grand Orient. Now, as the priests say, let us consider this beautiful mystery. It is certainly not an interdiction. There is no intimation of clandestinism, nor of irregularity, nor threat of permanent breaking off of relations. We Protestants disapprove of their failure to exact a firm belief in the existence of God and of the immortality of the soul, more, I think, because we are Christians than for any other reason. We believe even more. We teach the quote-unquote resurrection of the body through the faith in the merits of the line of the tribe of Judah, end quote. Though the Jews among us cannot agree with that, but it is there, and it cannot be found in the Anderson constitutions under which the Grand Lodge of France is working today. We are perhaps unconsciously gradually blending our Christian faith with Freemasonry, while we believe or teach that the latter unites men of every nation, sect, and opinion, and conciliates friendship among those who might otherwise have remained at a perpetual distance. The writer happens to know that there is a lodge in Swansea, Wales, under the obedience of the Grand Orient of France, which has the Bible on its altar, on which it obligates. The Deputy Grand Master of the Grand Orient assured us that they dedicate their lodges to the great architect of the universe, and that they permit the sacred writings to be kept on the altar of any and every lodge that wants it, and this they regard as becoming tolerance. The Grand Lodge of France, however, has never offended us in any way. It has not been even charged of having committed the infractions which have strained our relations with the Grand Orient. The Grand Lodge of France is a separate, distinct, and sovereign body recognized as such by the Supreme Grand Council from which it was separated. It is in fraternal amity with many sovereign Grand Lodges and has never until now asked for formal recognition of any American Grand Lodge. At the beginning of this European war, the Grand Lodge of France started a line of auto ambulances, opened soap houses and lunchrooms, and equipped a hospital for the use of wounded soldiers and for the aid of the indigent and needy of all nations without regard to quote-unquote race, creed, or previous conditions of servitude. We are now sending about 30,000 soldiers a month to Europe, most of whom go to France. Among these are many Masons. They naturally want to visit, and as our relations are strained with the Orient, we should make it possible for them to visit the lodges of the Grand Lodge of France. Personally, we have advised our soldier Masons of the District of Columbia that they are at liberty to visit the lodges of the Grand Lodge of France, but as relations are strained with the Grand Orient, we have advised that its lodges be not, at present, visited. So that concludes the 3-episode series on the Grand Orient of France, and keep in mind, this was published back in 1918, and there was some language within this that I felt was out of place and personally not something I would feel comfortable saying, so I did change a few words that I felt were more PC, if you will. The full text of the last 3 weeks will be in a document in this episode. I urge you to check that out and download it and use it. And maybe we can outline some things that have changed since 1918 when the original article was published back in January of that year. And that's it for this week. So before I close out, I just want to say one more huge thanks to everybody who was at Camp Masonry. And we're going to close out this week with a recording I made in the Council Lodge of the men present. We all sang a song of Freemasonry, and I think it sounds pretty great. You kind of had to be there, but in any case, so until next week, stay on the level. For Whence Came You, I'm Robert Johnson. Here it is.
You've been listening to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry with your host, Brother Robert Johnson. Be sure to join us for our next edition.